folks. Welcome to another episode of the Preparedness podcast that brings you the best in preparedness information. My name is Rob Hannes, and I'm the host for the show. If you're new to the podcast, what I try to do is bring some good preparedness information based on my experience and the knowledge I have researched and gone after and sought over the several decades now, unfortunately, that I've been preparing. And I'm trying to help other people get prepared. Right now, the preparedness movement is gaining strength for a variety of reasons. Some of them are political. Some of them are earth changes. The weather is becoming more intense. We're having more and larger earthquakes. So I want to help people get prepared. I do it in a manner that you're not afraid to sit your kids down and listen to the podcast at the same time. I think every once in a while we have a couple topics or a few words that might approach that sort of family boundary, but you're not going to have to worry about bad language on here and stuff like that. It's a very common sense, down-to-earth, straightforward podcast. We talk about preparedness and how we can get prepared. We talk about the issues that are facing us in today's world. Last week, I did part one of getting ready for the coming wild economic ride, and I was going to do part two, but you may have heard in part one that my voice was starting to go. I caught a bit of a throat cold, not exactly sure if it was allergies or what it was, but I got really froggy and hoarse, and I didn't want to record a podcast that's going to be downloadable for years to come and have my voice talk like this for the whole podcast. I just didn't think that would be the best move. So I tabled it to this week, feeling better, voice is better, so we're going to go ahead and go forward with that. Before we do, I want to make some announcements, got some housekeeping that need to catch up on. One of the listeners asked me if there was a website that took all the upcoming Prepper Expos and compiled them so people go to one place, and I didn't know of one. So I'm asking the listening group, if you know of any web page or website that actually does this. Is there a place where you can get a listing of all the Prepper Expos that are coming up for across the United States country, or even in the world if there are expos in other countries? If not, then I would be willing to put a page up on my website, and everybody can send me heck, you could just send me the expos. If you have an expo, or if you know an expo, go ahead and send it to me, and I'll put it up on my site. And if we actually come across a website that has those listings, then I'll just redirect or have a link to that site, because I think it's important that we get the word out on these expos. I mean, the organizers, I don't really think they're doing it to make money. I suppose there may be some money there. Doesn't really look like it's a huge investment to be a moneymaker. I think they do them because they believe in being prepped. So either way, though, these expos are really good resources for the prepper to find out what's in the area, find out what's local, get some hands-on with either books or tools or whatever, talk to some experts, see some educational training classes. So it's just a generally good idea to check them out. And so if we can put together a single resource for that, I think that would be great. So if you know of one, send me the link. If not, if you know of an expo in your area, if you know of one, send me the link, and I'll go ahead and create the page as well. If you've ever desired to have an article up on a prepper website, now's your opportunity. If you want to send me an article, or if you want to ping me with an idea for an article, a few of you already have, go ahead and send me an email at rob@prepcast.info. Either pitch me the idea or say, hey, this is what I want to write about, and we'll talk about it, or just go ahead and write it and send it on in. I'll go ahead and post it on up there. The preparedness community is a community. We're in this together. We're here to share ideas. We're here to help each other. For example, I put out an article on the website about executable file extensions, and these were the files that you needed to be concerned about as far as possibly having malware in them, viruses and Trojans and stuff. And I found this list on another site, and I posted a link to it and talked about it a bit, and they didn't list PDFs, and I should have done a little bit more research myself. I had never heard of a PDF virus, but apparently they are out there, and apparently they're not really all that uncommon. And one of the listeners had sent it on in, and he said, hey, look, you got this wrong. Here's a page you should check out. I talked about the malware in PDF viruses. And he was, I thanked him for it, and he was, hey, no problem. This is what we do. We're in together. We're here to help each other, and it's exactly right. So if you have knowledge you'd like to share, I'd be happy to put up on the website and share with everybody. One thing I haven't mentioned in a while is the sign up for the weekly news tips. I've got a weekly newsletter that comes out. You sign up, and you get a preparedness tip sent to your inbox every week. In addition, you also sign up for, I call it a newsletter, but really what it is, it's an RSS feed of everything that's going on the site for the last week, which kind of helps you either archive or catch up with what is going on if you haven't been to the site lately. To sign up for the news tips, all you have to do is go to the website, thepreparednesspodcast.com, and on the left-hand side, below those graphics of those two really great-looking books on the left, you're going to see subscribe to the weekly prep tip. Click on there, and all I ask for is your email. I don't ask for any other information, and you sign up, and you'll start getting the tips, and you're going to get them in order, so you're not going to miss out on anything that has been done previously. Speaking of those books, one of them is Surviving EMP, and I got a podcast series on this you can listen to. But the Kickstarter project for the EMP Shield project is still going. I'm not sure if they're going to make their goal, which I think is pretty sad. I think this is a project that we preppers should back. This couple is they're fabricating, and they want to put in production real EMP shielded Faraday cages. They want to have them tested, and apparently the testing is pretty expensive. So to me, that's the whole point of having this, is you can have something that's known to shield against EMP as opposed to just some do-it-yourself Faraday cages that we hope, based on best guesses and the available information, are going to work. So you can find that at Kickstarter.com. Search for EMP Shield. The book on Surviving EMP will give you a lot of the information that I have covered already. Been talking to several groups the past couple months about EMP. That's been going really well. Also, if you're looking to get prepared, or if you're trying to find a solution that basically tells you whether or not you're prepared or not, you should check out the Preparedness Capability Checklist. It's the latest book I've had published. I've been working on it for years. This is a checklist that can help you get prepared because it doesn't focus on items. It focuses on capabilities, on functions, on whether or not you have the ability to do something in order to survive. And that's how I've structured it. I've got 4 levels: portable, minimum, extended, and advanced, across 18 different categories. And you can start from scratch, or you can assess a current plan, like a bug out kit or something like that, and it will tell you. You'll know, are you prepared? Unlike an inventory list, because the information just isn't in that format. Okay, so we're going to be talking about getting ready for the coming wild economic ride. And I use the term wild because it is going to be wild. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be unprecedented, I think, at least in recent history. I think it's probably going to surpass the Great Depression in its magnitude. I think in some ways it already has, but I just had a conversation with my kids today about why the economic forecast is not looking so good. And I had to explain, and I should have recorded this because they had some great questions, and I kept it at a level that was very easy to understand. But it really is simple. It's easy. If you take out all the cruft and confusion and all the big words and that they try to use in the articles and the news stories and stuff, quantitative easing, all that means is that they're printing money to buy bonds every month. It's a big fancy term to keep people who don't understand or don't take the time to learn. They keep them in the dark. They do it on purpose. They don't want people who don't care enough or think they're too dumb to understand it. They want to stay in control, and they can stay in control by speaking above your head, so that you're like, oh, they must be smart. Look at all those big words they're using. It's not that complicated. It's the same as a household budget. And I know we've covered this before, but it's important to understand. And I know we have a lot of new listeners, and so I'm going to take a couple minutes just to go over this. The government spends more money than they bring in. in order to cover the difference from what they make and what they spend, they sell bonds. Typically, they either sell bonds to the American public, which we don't buy anywhere near the amount of bonds they would like to have us buy. So they sell bonds to foreign countries with the promise to pay. It's like a loan, but it's a certificate of basically, you gave me money, I'm going to give you money plus some more money in return after a certain period of time. That's what they're doing with bonds. Well, when we keep buying more bonds, and then when it comes time to pay off these bonds, we say things like, hey, you know what, instead of paying you off, I'm just going to roll this into another bond and I'll promise to pay you even more money. And so the debt keeps growing. Well, eventually our credit rating suffers as a country, which it has. Countries don't want to loan us the money unless they get a better interest rate, but interest rates are being held low. So nobody wants to buy our bonds, which means we can't, or not we, the federal government can't spend the money they want to spend. So they have the Fed, come in and say, oh, we'll cover this for you. And so the Fed tells Treasury, who is owned by the federal government, to print up money. They give it to the Fed, and the Fed gives it to the government, and the government spends it. And right now, that's happening to the tune of, 80-something billion a month. That's what quantitative easing is. The Fed is buying the bonds that nobody else wants to buy. As far as I know, when you have bonds, now I'm not a financial consultant, I'm not even really much of an investor, just kind of what I picked up is if you have bonds that nobody else wants to buy, they're called junk bonds because they're pretty much worthless before you even buy them. Well, that's what we have. So we have the Fed who is subsidizing the out-of-control federal budget spending. And currently, we have over $16 trillion that we owe to these bonds. Some of that is to the Fed, some of it is to other countries. This is not a good situation. We don't want to owe, well, put it this way. We owe money to basically everybody. All the other countries, China, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, probably Brazil and Australia, and all these people that have bought these bonds over the past decades, we owe them money. We owe them all money. And if I remember correctly, and I'm not a financial guy, I don't pack this stuff away in my head, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of the money that we're borrowing now is to pay off the interest on money that we've borrowed in the past. And it's snowballing. We can't keep this up. This is no different than if you did it in your household. Let's say you make X amount of dollars, but you want to spend X plus $50,000, and you get a bunch of credit cards, you take out a loan, now you owe money. So let's say you have credit cards. You owe $20,000 in credit cards. You can't make the minimum payments on these credit cards. So you go out and get some more credit cards, and you pay the old credit cards, you pay the minimum payment on those with your new credit cards. So all you're doing is transferring debt, but accruing more debt at the same time. That's kind of what we're doing. That is an unsustainable model. You can't continue. It is going to collapse at some point. Now, some of you out there who have been following this for a while, perhaps you've been a prepper a while because you've noticed back in the 80s or the 90s or even 10, 15 years ago, you've noticed that, the economy is not all that strong. We can't keep doing this. I'm going to start preparing. And this is kind of what I did after I got over the whole Russian nuke thing back in the 80s. The economy was one of the things I was concerned about. It didn't happen. I would have sworn back in the 90s it was going to crash, and it didn't. Now, we've had many crashes, but they never really lasted all that long. And one of the things that I've always kind of been perplexed about is how come the market has not crashed sooner? I mean, all the indicators were there, all the red flags were there. I remember distinctly people on the radio railing against the economy, saying, "Oh, there's no way the Dow is going to hit 10,000." I mean, we're far beyond that. And there was an article not that long ago, and I put it out on the Prepper News Watch, which is a series of articles that I collect every day, Monday through Friday, put on the website. These are the articles I think that have some relevancy to preparedness. Some of them are just general interest, like news and stuff like that, but a lot of them have some sort of basis that you may want to know about as a prepper. Well, one of these articles was talking about it's not time yet, and it was talking about a generational cycle, a generational positioning where there are 4 and we're going to get into a podcast this later. It basically comes down to something called the 4th turning. And I highly recommend that I'll put a link to this article again in the show notes. But what I would suggest is go to the internet and Google or search for the 4th turning. You can actually search for the 4th turning has arrived. And I think it's the first article. It's on peakprosperity.com. There is a podcast with Chris Martenson, and he is talking to Neil Howe, who is one of the presenters of this 4th turning project. They did a lot of study. I guess you could call it a study. He and William Strauss did this back, I think, in the 90s. And in a nutshell, what this is, they found there is a generational cycle. In essence, 4 generational archetypes. And these rotate through history. You are born into one archetype, and each of these periods is about the length of a generation, which is approximately 20 to 25 years. And you're born as an archetype, and I'm starting with your birth because it's easier to follow this way. So for the first 20 years of your life, you are, a young person. You are learning. You are either ignorant because you haven't learned yet, and you're coming out of your shell, or you're learning. And then basically the second period of life, 20 to 40 years, you're in a different sort of mode. The new archetype has replaced you as the young ones, and you have replaced the archetype before you in the 20 to 40 year old range. Then when you hit 40 to 60, now you're in a different general position. You're in a different generational position than you were in the previous 20 years. And now a new archetype has replaced the archetype that replaced you as being the infants and the teenagers. And the archetype that replaced you as infants now, is in the 20 to 40 year range, and you're in the 40, 60 year range. Well, this is typically the leadership position, the 40 to 60 year olds. Then when you get 60 to 80 or so to the rest of your life, you're in the senior part of your life, and you still have influence, but your influence has changed as far as your generational positioning. And so the way we look at this, or the way they look at this, is when the archetypes are lined up in a certain manner, each one it's called a 4th turning. So when you're born, the archetype you're born into determines, with your age, determines what turning you're in, basically. Well, there are 4 turnings, and we're going to have a podcast on this. I'm going to get into it more because I think this explains so much about what's happening and why, more importantly, why it's happening now. And so back in the 80s and the 90s, when we thought the economy was going to crash, and it never did, this is why. And this is why it's happening now, and probably why it's going to happen now. There was another article, and I can't remember, but it was I think past 2 or 3 weeks on the Prepper News Watch, and I wish I could remember who wrote it. I apologize for not being able to remember, but it's there if you search. But basically, what they were saying was they were using this sort of modeling, and they were saying the reason that none of this stuff has happened before is because it wasn't time. And when I read that, I'm like, oh, ding, that is what makes so much sense. When you couple that thought with this generational positioning, or the 4th turning, it makes a lot of sense. And basically what this generational positioning deals with is our attitudes as a country. It's not that we have big world wars during the 4th turning because it's the 4th turning. No. What happens is the opportunity exists in every generation. The opportunity is there, which if you want to look at this, if you wonder why every generation thinks that their generation could be the last and the end of the world is right around the corner, it's because of this sort of thing. Everybody kind of thinks this way, but yet as they grow through life and they take over different roles of their generation in society as a whole, we have different attitudes and different perceptions, and it's these perceptions. And when you get these archetypes in the right positions, it becomes the fourth turning, and it's these attitudes that we have as a country together that is what allows these things to happen. If something chaotic is going to happen, it's going to happen in the fourth turning. The fourth turning is a very chaotic, very unstable, very hard time because of our generational thinking. And I'm kind of glossing over this. Like I said, we're going to cover this in a later podcast. But this is why, and this to me, this makes perfect sense. This is why the economy has not failed, or didn't fail in the 80s, didn't fail in the 90s, didn't fail in the double aughts, because it wasn't time. Now, this article in peakprosperity.com, the title of it is "The Fourth Turning Has Arrived." We are officially in the fourth turning. And it's kind of like peak oil. If there is such a thing as peak oil, we won't know there's peak oil until we are far beyond peak oil, because we can only look at historical data to know at what point something started. So now we are far enough into the fourth turning to know that the fourth turning is here. So anyways, I don't want to get into this much more. This isn't what the podcast is about, but I think if you have the time, start looking into this, because we're going to get into this, and I think it explains a lot about what we're seeing and why this is different than the previous 60 years, which I think is important. And I think it's important because we don't want to fall into the trap of, oh, the economy has been bad for so long, it's just going to stay like this, nothing bad's going to happen. No, I think the time is quickly coming to a point where it is going to be ready for the collapse. And I think it's important to keep that perspective in mind, because we need to be prepared for this and not just assume that it's going to blow away like it always does. And since we're talking about the economy and finance and stuff, before I finish up this part 2, I want to talk about our sponsor for the podcast, and that is FlyingEagleGold.com. They've got a new coin available, and kind of excited about this. I was talking to some preppers at a meetup last week, and I was talking about these copper coins, these 1 ounce copper rounds. I think we're looking at a good idea here. I mean, gold and silver probably are going to get too expensive in an economic collapse to use on a daily basis. If you're buying groceries, you're buying gas, paying for chickens, whatever, gold is far too expensive. Silver will probably be far too expensive, especially when it gets up to $50 or $100 or more per ounce, which it definitely has the potential to do. You probably heard that you should save up your nickels because they're made of nickel. And nickel is an industrial metal that is going to go up, especially when the economy drops. Copper is another one. I mean, think of all the news reports we heard where people are ripping copper pipes and tubing out of radio stations and houses, and they're selling because the price of copper has gone up so much. So copper and nickel can be the coins that we use for daily trades. It has value. You can use them in other aspects. You can melt them down, I suppose, and build things out of them for metalwork and whatever, but they have value. Well, Jeff at FlyingEagleGold.com has got these copper coins, and they look really cool. They're incredibly inexpensive. I mean, the lowest you can go is a roll of 20, and right now he's got them for $39.95. If you buy 5 rolls, which is 100 coins, it's $152. Now, if you do some quick math, you'll realize that that's only $12, a little over $12 more than buying 4 rolls. So you're getting, 18 coins or 17 coins for free when you buy that much. When you think about it, America's money has been based on these 4 metals: gold, silver, nickel, copper. We've had gold coins, the $20 St. Gaudens. Our coinage that we used to use every day before 1965 was silver and nickels and copper. The pennies were copper. The nickels were nickel, and the nickels are still nickel, but they won't be for long. They will probably change it in the next couple of years. Your nickels will no longer be made of nickel. Why? Well, because nickel is getting expensive. Right now, your nickel has 4.3 cents worth of nickel. Now, if you include the cost of actually making that nickel and shipping it to banks and all that stuff, it's cost more to produce and ship the nickels than the nickel is worth. So in the near future, you're not going to see nickels made of nickel anymore. This is a good indicator that you should be storing up nickels. If you can find copper pennies, and these would be those minted between 1909 and 1982, they're 95% copper. You should hold on to them. But it's getting extremely difficult to find copper pennies and silver quarters and dimes in the money supply anymore. That's why people have gone out and tried to buy this stuff. And you can buy copper coins right now. This is what you can use: copper, nickel, silver, gold. This is going to be the commodities that we use when nobody wants to accept the dollar anymore. As the dollar gets worthless and to a point where nobody wants to accept it, you're going to have something that they want. A medium of exchange is what the economy is based on. That's why we have money. If everybody knows the value of gold, silver, copper, and nickel, then you're going to be able to conduct transactions for that. Hey, it's a chicken is worth 3 copper pieces, 3 ounces of copper. Okay, I've got 3 ounces of copper. It's a lot easier for me to carry 3 ounces of copper or 10 ounces of copper or nickel or whatever it is, as opposed to, the 5 bushels of lemons that this guy wants for 3 chickens. That's the sort of thing that causes barter to have problems, because it's very difficult to conduct business transactions like that. That's why we have money. Jeff has got these coins in stock right now. If you're listening to this podcast shortly after I put it out, give him a call, 855-289-7587, or go to flyingeaglegold.com. But give him a call. Let him know you heard about his copper coins on the Preparedness Podcast. In part 1 of getting ready for the coming wild economic ride, I just finished talking about reducing your material footprint. And you want to do this because you want to start to wean yourself from the luxury must-haves that you consume now. These could be eating out, having a new phone every 6 months, having the biggest and bestest TV, whatever it may be. You need to start learning to do with less. And I talked about that because in the collapse, you're not going to have access to this stuff anymore. You're going to have a lot of businesses are going to go out of business. They're going to shut down. You're not going to have access to the electronics. You're not going to have access to the food restaurants and stuff. They're just not going to be there. Well, this also goes for any vices that you have. If you are a nicotine person, tobacco, if you have a lot of caffeine, I know some programmers right now, they pretty much live on 5-hour energies, several a day. I don't think that's really healthy, but they're going to have some huge withdrawal problems when they can't get that stuff anymore. Same thing goes for alcohol, or chocolate, or sugar, or sweet, or whatever it is. If you have to have something, it's an addiction. Now, if you think you can go cold turkey, sure, try it. Do it for a month. Can you do it? Can you give up your coffee, your monster drinks, your 5-hour energies, your tobacco, chewing tobacco, cigarettes, whatever it may be? Can you give up your chocolate bar? You know what, my youngest son, Michael, I'm pretty sure that he can't give up chocolate. I know he would absolutely miss it. It's his most favorite thing in the world. He'd rather have a piece of chocolate over any other candy, cookies, cakes, whatever. That is his absolute favorite. So he would be very hard pressed. Now, he's not going to go through withdrawal. It's not like he eats tons of it. It's not really an addiction, but that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. Now, the other thing is, if you do have these, you should be making plans to deal with them, whether it is stocking up on nicotine patches or some sort of program that will help you wean off the nicotine. I hear the e-cigarettes work. I know a couple people that are doing those, and they seem to have pretty good luck with them. If you're a chocoholic, you may want to be stocking up on chocolate or coffee or whatever. Now, just as a side note, I know for a fact that you can take chocolate and freeze it for a long time. I pulled out chocolate that was, I think, 7 or 8 years old. We took 2 Hershey and 2 Hershey Special Dark, and vac sealed them and stuck them in the freezer, pulled them out. I could not tell they were 7, 8 years old, whatever. I would swear they were fresh. So if you have a chocolate fix that you need, you may want to think about stocking up on some chocolate that way. I don't know if you can do cigarettes. Alcohol pretty much lasts forever as long as it's covered. But you're going to want to have a plan to either wean yourself off of this stuff or have enough stock to kind of get you through those periods of time where, you're going to need your fix. The thing to keep in mind about vices like this is there is a withdrawal mechanism. It is going to change your behavior if you don't have these things. More importantly, or maybe just as importantly, it's going to change other people's behavior when they don't get their vice fix. Think about the drug addicts that have to have their fix. They steal, they break into people's houses now. What is it going to be like when they can't get it and they go through those massive withdrawal symptoms? This is part of the problem we're going to have in any urban environment, potentially in the rural environment as well, because the drugs have gotten there too. But it's not just nicotine and alcohol and drugs. It's easy money. It's the fact that they can go with their EBT card to anywhere and get food anytime they want. What happens when those cards no longer work? That's like an addiction. That's an addictive personality. You're going to have to deal with that person who suddenly can't get what has always been there for them. You're going to have to take that into account as well. Once the economy collapses, and we're in a bubble, whatever bubble you want to call it, the housing bubble, the quantitative easing bubble, the bond debt bubble, the whatever. It's a bubble. It's going to pop. And when it does, common daily items are going to disappear fast. And after that, they're going to be in really short supply. Look at any country that's gone through economic strife, and you're going to see this is what happens. Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina, Cyprus, Russia, Zimbabwe, it's all the same. We're going to have that same problem here. Now, I have a podcast, and I think there's an article that goes with it about what these sundry items are. That's what I call them, sundries. They're miscellaneous items that are very common. Your toiletries are going to be part of that. This includes things like your toiletries, antiperspirant and toilet paper and feminine hygiene products and foot powder if you need it. Anything that you use on a daily basis, you should have a stock of, because when it runs out, after that, it's going to be very difficult to get because of a variety of reasons. One, expense. Two, businesses that make these things will have shut their doors. Linens, make sure you don't throw away your old towels and your blankets and sheets and pillowcases. They have uses as what they were intended for, but there are other uses as well. Not just your toiletries, your kitchen items, miscellaneous stuff, things like your foils and wraps, your paper products like napkins and paper towels, trash bags, clothespins, Lysol, insect repellent, sunscreen, vitamins, and your over-the-counter medicines, your allergies and pain relievers and the stuff you use every day and even the stuff you use occasionally. You're probably going to have a good supply of it because we've seen that countries that go through hyperinflation, they don't have a lot of this stuff anymore because it's too expensive to buy, or it's too expensive to make, or the companies are shut down. They're just not there anymore. So we're going to see this stuff disappear. It should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways, that food storage should be among the top priorities in your preparedness planning if you're preparing for the economic collapse. Food is going to be exceptionally hard to get because of all the reasons that make the economy collapse in the first place. So you should have a good food store. I would make sure you have a wide variety of foods, but if you are limited on funds, then go with the basics, because when you're starving, you're hungry, at least you're going to have some food. Much better than trying to boil a shoe or panhandle for some weak soup on the streets. And yes, you should be looking at how to grow your own food. If you can grow your own food, that's going to help and be able to, produce and feed your family. The problem is, and a lot of people don't really realize this. I've talked to a lot of preppers who think that they have a 6-month supply of storage food and a can of survival seeds, and they're good to go. They're going to be sadly mistaken when they actually try to grow that food. Now, if they're in an urban environment where there is some food available that they can still get some way, either partly from their food storage and partly from the grocery store or whatever's out there, that will probably help. But here's the reality of the situation with gardens. If you're not growing food right now, don't expect for you to just open your can of survival seeds, throw it, sprinkle it on the ground and water it, and then be able to eat that stuff in about 5 or 6 months. It doesn't work that way. Gardening is a lifetime hobby. I know this because I've tried it several times and I still can't get it right. And the people I talk to who do it all the time, they are constantly looking for ways to do things better because this crop failed, or this didn't come in right, or the tomatoes don't look good, or the weather wasn't good this year, so we didn't plant tomatoes, whatever it may be. You can't just expect to, okay, honey, we're gonna grow our own food this year. Go out, dig up some grass, or rototill a section of your yard, throw down some seeds, and suddenly you got food for the year. It just doesn't work that way. You have to expect, at the minimum, you need 2 years of stored food, because that first year that you're going to try to grow a garden is going to be a miserable failure. If you're lucky, you'll be able to get maybe half of your next year's garden that you'll be able to eat. And of course, since you're going to have to be eating all these days that you're waiting for your garden to come in, you're going to have the food available to do that. So yes, having a garden and having seeds is important, but you really need to be realistic in your assumptions and how quickly you're going to be able to get a garden up from scratch. Same thing goes for water storage. If you're in an area that has low water, like the Southwest, or actually almost anywhere west of the Mississippi, the water is not all that great. We're facing near Dust Bowl conditions. In fact, they're afraid the Dust Bowl is returning to the Midwest, the Kansas, Oklahoma area, because of the drought that's going on there. So if you don't have your own well, and that well isn't a good well that provides enough water, you need water storage too. One of the things that we preppers tend to do when we look at what can happen and what our plans are going to be is sometimes we don't quite look at the realistic picture, and we assume that things are going to be the same, or we're always going to be in one place. For example, many of you are probably considering that you're going to tough it out at home no matter what, and you're going to make the best of it no matter what the economy does or whatever the disaster is. That's great, and that's a good plan to start, but you do need to consider what happens if you have to relocate. You can't assume that you're going to be able to stay in your apartment or your house or your townhome or your farm or whatever it is, no matter what. There are so many things that can happen. You could have a fire. You could have an infestation of cockroaches or bees or scorpions or whatever that forces you to relocate because it's just untenable. You can't stay there anymore. In an economic situation, if you're renting, you could easily find yourself out on the streets because they've raised your rent and you can't afford it, not just where you were, but anywhere, because the landlords are keeping up with inflation. This is why renting is not a very good idea during the collapse, because, or I should say during an inflationary period, because the rents keep going up. You may not be aware of this, but there are still tent cities here in America from the last recession, from years ago. People are still there. And they're there, quite honestly, because the economy really hasn't improved. We've kind of made some lateral shifts, and everybody assumes that it's not doing too bad because it hasn't gotten worse, but it hasn't really gotten better. The unemployment is still terrible. It's not what is being reported. If you have to look at the U6 numbers, which I think is about 15, 16, 18% unemployment, real unemployment, and if you include the people that are underemployed, it's even worse. So yes, we have a lot of people that are out of work. We have a lot of people who may have a job, but they can't afford to live anywhere. Their credit has been shot, and they have to live in these tent cities. So part of your plan should be about relocating to a non-dwelling location. a campground, a tent city, the forest preserve, someplace out in the someplace that doesn't have, you know, four walls and a ceiling other than what you bring. You need to prepare for that. You might be the person who's moving to tent city. Now, it's likely, because you're a prepper and you're listening to this podcast, that you already have camping gear. However, if you don't, you need to start acquiring it now. You need to have all the basics covered. Cooking, shelter, sleeping, and so on. And not to shamelessly plug my book, but that's what the Preparedness Capability Checklist is all about, is making sure you can cover these basics. It's not about telling you what tent you should have. It's about you need to have shelter. You need to be able to cook in this certain way. And that's what you need to look at in order to, am I prepared? Am I prepared to relocate to a non-dwelling area? Am I prepared to camp on an indefinite basis? Do I have the things to be able to do the tasks in order to survive in that sort of environment? The PCC can help you do that. That's the thinking tool that it is. But you need to think about this. You need to, if you start downsizing now, that's great, but you should also either downsize or make a list of the things that you have to take with you. If you have to relocate to a tent city or some non-dwelling location, you're not going to be able to take everything with you. You need to know what it is you can take. You probably can, at that point, you probably be able to rent a trailer or borrow a trailer at some point if you don't already have one, and know what you can take with you. This is going to be crucial because you may not have the luxury of several weeks. You may only have a weekend to get out. I know some people, even in the area I live in, which is not really a rundown urban area, it happens. People get a weekend's notice and they are out. That's just how the landlords are. The thing to keep in mind when you talk about losing your place to stay, your plan, your preparedness plan, needs to cover all contingencies as much as possible. Never, ever become a refugee. You always need to have a place to go, whether it's a family member's, a friend's, or even just your favorite camping spot. You need to have a place to go. Don't become a refugee, because if you look back in history and see what happens to refugees, it's never good. So don't allow yourself to become a refugee. Now that we have all been educated on what a bail-in is, aka what happened in Cyprus, you should be aware of the need to keep as much of your money out of banks as possible. You don't want to have it within reach of bankers and government. They're going to take it. We already know. We are seeing the articles come out. I post as many as I find on the Prepper News Watch because it's important for you to know. Several years ago, back when the recession first happened, there were stories we had out, and they're still on the website if you search for them, about safety deposit boxes being confiscated. Not because the person failed to pay, but because the government was looking for cash. They were looking for ways to make money, and the safety deposit boxes is one of the quickest ways they can do that. You have to expect this to happen. If they can get to your money, they're going to tax you, they're going to bail in you, whatever it takes to get to your money. But if they can't get to your money, it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to get to your money without your permission. And so honestly, in my opinion, even if you just keep cash at home, it's going to be a heck of a lot safer than keeping it at the bank. Yet, keeping cash at home is also a losing game, not just because of the risk, because you can take care of the risk through fireproof gun safes, bolt to the floor, caching, hiding, burying in the backyard. You can take care of your own money at least as secure as a bank can. However, it's a losing game when you're considering inflation, because without even getting into hyperinflation, just the yearly erosion of the money value is enough to want to buy something with your money before it loses more value. Sure, a dollar is still a dollar, but every year it's buying you less and less. That's an inflation economy. Money loses the value, and the only way you can preserve it is to buy something that retains its value despite, or perhaps because of, a collapsed economic system. You want to store tangible goods. When you buy a case of ammo. That ammo, the value of that ammo actually is going up. It's like an investment almost, because whatever ammo you bought 5 years ago, you would spend more money to buy it now. And especially now that guns and ammo are really hard to come by because of the political nature of the country right now, it's even worth more. So it's not just buying gold and silver, but it's not just buying food, because, people say, oh, well, you can't eat your gold and silver. Yeah, but I can't eat my ammo and my guns either. I can't eat my flashlights. I can't eat my pants. I can't eat any of these tangible items. And that's something to consider too. Cotton is likely to go up. Look forward. Socks, underwear, pants, shirts, shoes. If you have children, maybe start buying sizes that are bigger and they're going to get to eventually. This is the kind of stuff that you can do to invest your money now at a lower price so that you have to spend less later. Now, if money is tight, then what you should do is you should focus on those items that you and your family need for basic survival. Make sure you can take care of that first, because when it comes down to it, that is the basic foundation that all your prep should be based on. As we've talked about, if you have to relocate to Tent City, but you have no camping gear, you're going to be very hard pressed to just survive, even though you're not out in the wilderness. You're still around people in some sort of community. It's going to be very difficult, and you're going to be relying on other people's charity, which may not be there or may be in very short supply simply because of the way the economy is. As previously stated, don't be a refugee. Have your stuff to take care of you and your family, and always have a place to go. Now, when you're thinking about buying tangibles for an economic collapse, something that holds value, the conversation inevitably turns to barter. And people will say, you must have barter items, which, if you plan to barter, yeah, that's a good idea. However, in my opinion, I don't feel that you should store items specifically for barter purposes, because unless you're rich and can just throw money at things you don't need, I wouldn't suggest that, because that's exactly what you'd be doing. If you don't drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes or drink coffee, you shouldn't be storing these things and saying, well, they're for barter, because you're taking the money that you could be buying for your stuff, for your preparedness and your family's welfare, and you're wasting it on things that you don't even use. And so if you're going to stock up for barter, then just buy more of the things that you already want to have on hand. Chances are the things that you have are things that other people are going to need. Candles, matches, over-the-counter medicines, candy, like hard candy, alcohol like whiskey or toilet paper and soap. Those are good things if you use them. If you don't drink whiskey, then don't store whiskey. But you know what? Everybody needs toilet paper. Stock up on toilet paper. Have extra. If you use, let's just say, you use 30 rolls in a 3-month period, 10 rolls a month. Well, don't store 10 rolls. Store 15 rolls a month. Then you've got, 5 rolls that you could barter away if you needed to. See, here's the thing. Let's say you store those little itty-bitty bottles of whiskey that you find as the trial samples at like Total Wine or whatever your local liquor store is, and they're cheap and you can put them away. And you go to barter with the chicken guy, and you're like, hey, I got this whiskey here in these little bottles. How much? He goes, I don't need alcohol. I don't drink alcohol. Or perhaps he makes his own. I don't need that. Well, that's all what I have to barter with. Sorry. How about some toilet paper? And you're like, I didn't store any extra toilet paper. Well, sorry. Chickens for toilet paper, that's all I want. I don't want whiskey. Well, now you're stuck with the whiskey. Maybe your next barter goes the same way. If you can't barter away that whiskey or that nicotine or whatever it is, then that item is useless to you if you don't use it yourself. So that's why I say do not store items for barter that you don't actually use yourself. It's just a waste of money. Store more of the things that you use and plan to use some of those items for your bartering. However, I have to be honest, I don't really give bartering all that much consideration because I don't know what that's going to look like at that point. So instead, what I do is I try to stock up on those things that are going to retain their value post-collapse, whether it's gold, silver, whether it's flashlights or matches or candles or food or whatever. Those are the things that I choose to invest my preparedness budget into because they're going to have value regardless of what the dollar does. Another skill that I think preppers should develop is the ability to maintain a positive attitude. Being able to look at the situation in a positive manner allows you to see opportunities and options that you may not have seen simply because you were too down and out and too depressed to think about it clearly. If you read the accountings of survival stories, people who have been in plane crashes or boating accidents or they're out in the wilds trying to survive, it comes down to that positive mental attitude, the I know I'm going to survive, not the we're dead, we're all going to die. Your attitude definitely affects how you look at things. And that doesn't mean you have to have a cheery disposition because, most people don't. But you do want to stay positive, especially if you have children. You want to stay positive around them because they look to you. You're the family leader. If you're, for whatever reason, the de facto leader or people elected you to lead them through whatever crisis that is, you definitely need to stay positive because that is where people are going to draw their strength from. And a lot of times you may not even know you have that strength until you actually are in a position of leadership. But it's very important because this is what allows you to see the opportunities that arise in front of you. You can capitalize on them if you're not, so depressed that you're always thinking about the negative and what's going wrong instead of looking at what's going right and what can go right. I don't think anybody can dispute the economic path that we're on or how the near future is going to be some of the worst that we've seen since the Great Depression. I think the potential for it is extreme. If you look at the dynamics of the economy and distill it down to its simplest form, it's pretty easy to see that we're on a path that doesn't really end well for us. I hope it does. I hope there's some solution out there that nobody's thought of that, doesn't get any worse than it is, but I'm not going to hold my breath. This podcast and the last podcast, we've been talking about some of the things that you should be considering for your preparedness plan on surviving an economic collapse. Certainly, it's not everything that you could possibly be doing, but that's pretty much what preparedness is. The breadth of scope of trying to be prepared is so large that you shouldn't try to do everything all at once. You should take it in little steps. Do these things, then once you've covered this, then expand and look to see how you can improve this, look for other threats, other opportunities, and build on what you have previously done. So, as I mentioned, that's how I see this podcast. It's a thinking process. It helps you get your mind in the right perspective and start thinking about these things. So I hope that I've helped illustrate some of the things that you should be looking at when you're getting ready and making your preparedness plan on surviving an economic collapse. I want to thank you for downloading and listening to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast series, you can help support the podcast in one or more ways. Let other people know about the podcast. If you have friends or family that are interested in preparedness or they're considering getting prepared, tell them about the podcast. Let them know that we're here and the preparedness information that we're putting out. This will help increase our listenership and keep the podcast strong. Another thing is you can click on the Amazon banners that we have on the website. This clicks you right through to Amazon. You pay the same price that you normally would on Amazon, but we get a little bit of a commission. And, it's not a lot, but every little bit helps. You can also sign up for an Audible subscription by going to audiblepodcast.com/prepcast, or you can click on the banner that's on the website at thepreparednesspodcast.com. You get access to really great audiobooks. You've heard me talk about audiobooks before. They're some of my favorite things to listen to. If you're looking for something great to listen to, and you're kind of a science fiction fan, Old Man's War by John Scalzi is an excellent audiobook. The narration is top-notch, very enjoyable, and I would recommend that as your first listen if you have not already listened to it. And finally, but certainly not least, support our advertisers and let them know that you heard about them through the Preparedness Podcast. These are some of the things that you can do to help support the podcast and help us continue to put out the great information that we have been. Until next time, folks, enjoy life and be safe.